Welcome into a election recap version of MPW Digital Extra. I'm Neil McCready, joined by our friend Ike Fesler. You saw Ike back with McCready and Siskey back in Fairbanks, Alaska, and then most recently on one of the more popular shows I think we've ever done. We did an election preview show. I guess it was a week ago today, wasn't it, Ike? Crazy.
A week ago today.
It was the day after the Ole Miss Arkansas game in Fayetteville. We've had a full week, and obviously Ole Miss just played Georgia in Vaught Hemingway yesterday. It's a huge win for Ole Miss. And I've been writing about that, and I just literally thought hit my mind. I'm like, oh my God, it's only been 1 week. 1 week ago, I was doing the show in Fayetteville about 1 week and 2 hours ago.
Yep.
All right, so first, thanks for being with us. Appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
So you and Josh, you guys nailed this.
Josh nailed it. He called 312 and he got it.
He nailed it on the nose. But I think you were in pretty much lockstep agreement with him when it came to, hey, here's what I kind of think is going to happen. I'll start here. Why were you so confident that it would go that way? And then what were your thoughts sort of on Tuesday night as the results began to roll in?
So Neil, again, thanks for having me. This is always a lot of fun, and chance meetings turn into friendships, right? Who thought I'd run into some dude in Fairbanks, Alaska, repaying a lost bet, and then here we are on a highly listened to and viewed podcast. So your first question was my thoughts, or why was I so confident? Why was I so confident? I was confident because I think you could probably relate to this too. I think just the feeling of the last 4 years, and a lot of people vote based on how they're feeling. They don't vote just based on the price of eggs doubling or butter being $7, for some butter, or gasoline being double what it was prior to the previous president. I think they vote on feeling and emotion. And I feel, and people that are listening to you will disagree with me. My thoughts are the Harris-Walz campaign was one that was ran of fear. It was fear of, if you don't vote for me, this is what you're going to get. I'm not going to tell you my specific policy positions because I don't want to take a chance of alienating any specific voting demographic. But I promise you, if you do not vote for me, you're going to get fascism, Hitler, Nazi, la, 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 la. So that was the primary reason for my confidence. And having been in DC for 10, almost 11 years now, worked in the Trump White House, the Obama White House, and on Capitol Hill. In DC, and talking with a lot of my colleagues and friends, and I have friends on Capitol Hill, senators and congressmen that I'll text from time to time. And there was just an aura that he was going to win. And even for a small moment after Biden dropped out and they had to recalculate their opponent, because then it became Kamala Harris versus Joe Biden. She had an initial bump of being the nominee at that time, and she was somebody different than Joe Biden. But that was short-lived, and Trump didn't do well on the debate with Kamala Harris. I'll be the first one to tell you that. He didn't do well. But the bar for her was so low that she just showed up and shook his hand and she won the debate. So, when the closing days, you had people coming out that were Latino voters supporting Trump. You had Black voters supporting Trump. You had the inner cities in Chicago, Philadelphia, Detroit, where he almost doubled his vote, by the way. And the Republicans should start fighting for the cities because they've been run by Democrats for decades and decades. There's a huge growth opportunity there. Conversely, the Harris-Walz campaign had Taylor Swift, Oprah, and they had all the celebrities. Well, I don't know about you, Neil. I'm not voting based on what a celebrity tells me. And it might just piss somebody that's a middle of the road person off enough to say, you know what, I'm not, they live in their ivory palaces. They've got private jets, and here I am trying to send my kid to college and taking out student loans, and that the current president wants to forgive. And I'm just not going to vote for that. So that's why I was confident. And then the pollsters started hurting their polls. You know, we talked last week about the Seltzer poll in Iowa, and my goodness, was she wrong.
Wow.
It was a 13-point error. Kamala lost Iowa by 13 points. So Ann Seltzer, I don't know if she got a payout or, you know, what it was, but her reputation was deeply damaged going forward. If you look back to 2020 and you look at the polls, Real Clear Politics is a great aggregate for polls, and they play it middle of the road. Atlas Intel almost accurately called the 2022 election. They were pretty spot on for the 2022 midterms, where everybody thought it was going to be a red wave, and who knew it was just going to be delayed 2 years. And they got it right again. And come to find out, 3 elections in a row, the Trump campaign has been underpolled because people either fear of being vocal about voting for him, or they're like, I don't trust you, I'm not going to vote for you. So when did I start feeling confident on Tuesday night? I started feeling pretty confident on Tuesday night after Georgia closed, and he jumped out to a huge lead at the beginning.
Yeah, massive.
It was a huge lead, massively. Not insurmountable, because you didn't have the DeKalb and Fulton counties reporting yet, which we could have this discussion another podcast or what, but why is it always the swing counties and the big cities and the swing counties that can't count their votes?
Oh, it's a question I have for you. And in fact, we can attack this one now. We can jump around. That's one of the great things about podcasts. One of the questions I have, and I was listening yesterday. I was on my way to the stadium, and it was Tucker Carlson was interviewing Vivek Ramaswamy. And you can think, a couple of right-wing guys, whatever you want to think. But Ramaswamy, who comes across to me as a very rational thinker, he said, how is it possible, basically, I'm paraphrasing, in the same country can we have Florida, this massive state, with 2 time zones, and you got a big panhandle, and then you got this giant peninsula that goes down. You've got Miami on one end, Pensacola on the other, Jacksonville, Tampa, Orlando. I mean, not leaving. You got college towns, Tallahassee, Gainesville, whatever.
Gainesville, all that
stuff. How is it that they can basically turn their election around in an hour? In an hour. And meanwhile, in Arizona, and I've been to both these places. I've been to Arizona. I've been to Florida. It's not like it's going to 2 different worlds. How is it that in Arizona, in the Phoenix area, big area, but it's just one giant square. How is it? How is it that we're still counting votes? We're still counting votes. I got a message from one of somehow people trolled me on both ends. Yeah. And I get text messages from everybody. Biden, Harris, Carrie Lake. I got something from Carrie Lake yesterday asking for money. I mean, it's the Saturday after the election, and she's still not, I guess, mathematically eliminated. How is that possible, and why can't we fix that?
So I would offer that in the 2000 election when, and you and I are close to the same age, Neil, I remember vividly the 2000 election, Bush won by like 538 votes in Florida, right, after long recounts. But the visual of hanging chads, and Florida said, we are not going to be popular for a failed election vote again. And they have fixed it. It's not necessarily a Ron DeSantis issue because he's been the governor for 6 years. Florida has had their elections fixed for a long, long time. Now, why can't Arizona do it? It's the will of the politicians that run the state. Maricopa County, they saw what happened in 2020 and what happened in 2022. What have you been doing the last 2 years? I mean, Nevada, they're still counting votes. They're still counting votes in Maine. There are 32 people that live in Maine, and they can't count all the votes.
Okay, so why can't we just have a national holiday? Have a day, have a national holiday, paper ballots, one day.
Yep.
we can do the early voting for people who are out of town, or the elderly and
handicapped and
handicapped
such.
and all that stuff, right? But let's just have
Yeah.
I don't care if we have a holiday weekend, for God's sake, and just do the
Mhm.
voting, count the votes, and be done
Yeah.
with it. They can do it in other countries. We could do it here. We don't do it because somebody doesn't want to do it. Is it possible
somebody-
that the president mandates it?
Potentially, but I think you get into some shaky ground there when you start having the federal government trying to police the elections writ large. Now, can the government enact a federal holiday the first Friday in November to be election day? Sure. And then everybody gets that day off and you've got a long weekend and you keep the polls open the whole weekend.
Yeah.
Because there are the people that got Trump over the finish line and helped him win the popular vote are the people that work Monday through Friday and have to take time off to go vote.
That's when
it is those people.
I knew Ike that he was winning. I drove back from Fayetteville that Tuesday morning. I got back. I had to write some football, and it was about 4:30 in the afternoon, and I think I had CNN on. It may have been Fox News. I think it was CNN, and they were showing lines of people in Pennsylvania, and the line just went on and on and on and on. And I said, he won. He won. It was the same thought that I had in 2008 when they showed the lines of people waiting to vote for Obama. And it was frankly, looking back on it, it was the first sign that I was like, huh.
Yeah.
In 2016, when they showed the lines of people waiting to vote for Trump, and you're like, huh. But we had so counted Trump out that day that we didn't really think about it. It was this time you were looking for it. There it was. And I'm like, oh, he's going to win. And sure enough, and this is where I thought about you on Tuesday when Virginia came in really close. And they didn't have Northern Virginia yet. And you're like, well, she's going to win Virginia, but she's not winning by a whole lot. This thing's going his way.
Yeah, I told you if he was under 5 in Virginia, he might run the table of the swing states, and he did. He lost Virginia by, I think, 3.9. He lost it by 3.9. And the long lines, and we focused on the swing states, and a lot of people gave Trump a hard time for going to states like Colorado and had a fundraiser in California at Coachella, and then he had a big rally in Madison Square Garden. Well, he was running up the vote because he wanted to win the popular vote. And the popular vote did two things. The popular vote, I think, quelled a lot of the, he's not legitimate, he's illegitimate, get rid of the Electoral College. And then 2, Washington, D.C. has been remarkably quiet. It's been almost like it's been normal. Versus when he won the first time and didn't win the Electoral College. People were setting cars on fire, and, the poor lady that is part of the famous meme when he was inaugurated in 2017, she's in like a green jacket and a hat, and she's just screaming on the ground. I mean, they should pay her royalties. She'd be a wealthy woman. But there's been none of that so far. So I think the popular vote helped quell a lot of that. And while we're on the topic about him winning the popular vote, he only lost New Jersey by 4%.
Yeah.
He lost Illinois by 4%. That is insane. He doubled his vote in the Bronx to 30%. He lost New York by less than he won the state of Florida.
He cut the Biden lead from 4 years ago in half.
In half.
So
now,
what do you read
ahead.
into that? What is that? And obviously she still won New York, but those are huge deficits that he trimmed in those cities. And then we have all seen the maps now of county by county all over the country.
Yeah.
Where did Trump gain? Where did Trump overperform? Where did Harris overperform? And it's like this sea of red with a dot here of there of blue.
It's sea of red. And going into election day, all the pundits, all the smart people, not me, but all the smart people were saying, well, the white man is not going to get him over the top. All the votes of the white man is not going to cancel out the Latino vote, the black vote, the LGBT vote. Well, come to find out, Trump came pretty close to winning the Latino vote. And in Texas, 3 counties on the border had not gone for a Republican since the 1870s. They too are tired of the way the border has been run for the last 4 years. So what I think on going forward, Trump's only going to be in office 4 years, right? but I think he has reshaped the Republican Party for a generation. The Democrats, if they don't get their house in order, and if these pundits on BSNBC and the CNNs and, Daily Kos, if they keep pointing their finger at us and saying people voted against their own rights, people are misogynistic, racist, and xenophobic, they're going to lose again in 28. If they don't learn how to get back to their roots when they used to be a centrist party that were believers in gun rights and the First Amendment and the blue-collar worker, all they're going to have is the coastal elites. They're going to have the George Clooney's and those people who's remarkably been silent and still hasn't left the country. But hey, it's still early. But Trump ran the score up. He won by 4 million votes on the popular vote. And there was another story that came out. I think it was there's a podcast called Save the Pod or something like that. Yeah. John Favreau, who is a writer in the Obama administration, back in June, their internal polling said if Biden didn't get out of the campaign, Trump was going to win 400 electoral votes. And I could have seen that happening. But I do think Joe Biden, for all of his failings, did have a blue-collar draw because he did go up in Scranton, Pennsylvania. And there was a draw that, he came from a poor, normal upbringing. And that was a lot of that vote he got in 2020. But where did the 15 million people that voted in 2020 go? Because if you look at a graph, 12, 16, and 24, it's about pretty even as far as, the number of votes, 65, 68, 70, 72 million. And then during COVID, it spikes to 81. Where did all those people go? Did they just stay home?
I mean, it's more than fair. People push back on it. They're like, wait till all the vote comes in and all of that stuff. And you're like, look, man, I mean, there's only a couple of rational explanations for it. One is that it was more difficult to vote, and so they didn't.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then there's another explanation.
Yeah.
And that's
I don't buy, I don't buy it's difficult to vote. Every state gives you so many ways to vote. In most states where you don't have a photo ID, the states will give you one for free. And I have to show my ID, albeit my advanced age, when I buy liquor. I have to show my ID when I get on a plane, when I register my car.
You check
and the most sacred of our rights. Why would you not want to have an ID? Why would you not want to? So that's probably for another podcast as people start dissecting why that many people didn't vote. But, the Democrats for the last 5 days, the James Carvilles, now you got Bernie Sanders and Nancy Pelosi in a public spat over why the Democrats lost. And Bernie Sanders, not a huge fan, but at the same time, he's not wrong. The Democrats have abandoned the working class voter.
Yeah.
Absolutely abandoned them.
It's almost as if the parties have sort of passed in the night and switched roles in some ways. I mean, I can remember as a kid thinking of the Republicans as the rich people. Yeah. And now it's not that. It's Trump won because he has an appeal now for 3 elections. He has an appeal to that middle class, working class, family values person.
Yep, I agree. And when he first picked J.D. Vance, I was not a fan. I thought it should have been Tim Scott for a lot of reasons. Personally, I like Tim Scott. I've met him a few times. But the more J.D. Vance spoke, the more I liked him. And he doesn't offend you when he gives you facts. He had Martha Raddatz on TV when she was interviewing him about the Venezuelan gangs taking over apartment complexes in somewhere in Colorado. And Martha Raddatz says, well, it was only a few apartment complexes. And J.D. Vance says, do you hear yourself right now? Only a few? How many is enough? And, my mom and dad got divorced when I was 13 years old. My father was a raging alcoholic and an abuser and ran around on my mom. And people like me relate to J.D. Vance. He was raised in a broken home, raised by his grandmother, pulled himself up by the bootstraps, went to an Ivy League school, became a venture capitalist, and now he's the vice president at age 40. At age 40, hell, I didn't even know what I wanted to do. And now that it all makes sense to me now why Trump chose J.D. Vance, because Trump knows those voters that he's been trying to reshape into the Republican Party or get their votes, he has to pass that mantle to somebody, and J.D. Vance is the closest person to him to do that because those people can relate.
I want to get to what you think Trump will do once he gets inaugurated here soon, but I do want to wrap up the House races, the Senate races.
Yep.
Some of these things are still sort of out there, which is mind-boggling to me 5 days later, but nonetheless, it's where we are. Yeah. You've been pretty spot on what happens here. How does it end up looking come January? Yeah,
so I'm not one to brag, but on the podcast last week, I did say McCormick and Moreno would win, didn't I? I said it.
You did.
Yep, said it. Now, you and I have been texting through the week on election night specifically, and I thought Rogers and Hodby were going to win. I thought they were going to pull it out. And Carrie Lake, just not a great candidate. If she had accepted defeat in 2022 in the governor's race, I think she could have won the Senate race. But she is just not an appealing candidate. She's lost statewide twice. And if the Republican Party in Arizona does it again, they're going to lose again. If she runs for governor in 2 years against Katie Hobbs, she's going to get beat again. So now you talk about the House and Senate races. Let's talk about the Senate races real quick. So in states that Trump won, in these battleground states, he won Arizona by a couple of 100,000 votes. He won Nevada by, I think, 75 or 80 maybe. He won Michigan and Wisconsin. In those 4 states, which were considered battleground states, the Democrat candidate won. So does that mean the appeal to Trump is an anomaly? And then in 28, the GOP is going to lose that appeal because Trump's no longer on the ballot? That's yet to be seen. That is quite possible. Going into now, let's go back to 22 when you had the Senate races in Georgia, and then you had some other Senate races where you had candidates like Dr. Oz that got beat by Fetterman. If you had nominated McCormick in 22, I think McCormick would have beat Fetterman. McCormick's just a great candidate. And then you would potentially be looking at very close to a supermajority for the Republicans, which means it's filibuster proof. Now, going into January, and I saw a story this afternoon, and I'm sure you did too, that outgoing Senate Majority Leader, now calling for bipartisanship, soon to be Minority Leader, Chuck Schumer, who's calling for bipartisanship, is refusing to let McCormick take part in Senate orientation.
It shows me, that in and of itself shows me that they don't get it yet. Now, they've only had 5 days, so maybe they have time to get it. But for the first 5 days, the lesson has not been learned.
It's not been learned, and they are still eating their own. So the House races, last I checked, the Republicans, it was 212 to 200, and you got to have 218 to have a majority. And the races that are remaining are either toss-up or leaning Republican. So I'm pretty confident they're going to have about maybe 219, 220, 221 is what the House is going to be. I do think, due to Trump's popular vote win, that he has a mandate. And I think the first 100 days are going to tell us what his presidency is going to look like. And, the Charlie Kirks and the Jack Posobics and the Elon Musks and the RFK Juniors, they are kind of driving the ship on who's going to be in his cabinet, because Twitter's been ablaze about Mike Pompeo. Very close friend of mine, used to work for him, loves him. But the Trump Nation people view him as a war hawk, and they don't want him anywhere near the Pentagon. Nowhere near the Pentagon. So either late last night or this morning, President Trump came out and said that Pompeo and Haley will not be in his administration. And they're great Americans. They served selflessly, but I think this is a step in the right direction. And a lot of this has Susie Wilds' fingerprints all over it.
Now, for
My
people,
girlfriend,
I kind of
yeah,
know
go
who
ahead.
Susie Wilds is, but I think a lot of people out there really
Yeah,
don't have a real knowledge. She was the person behind Trump's campaign in many ways.
yep.
Very much behind the scenes, at least during the campaign. I mean, in fact, on the night that he won, he tried to bring her to the stage, and she's like, "I'm not talking." You know,
Yep.
I'm gonna
You know who her father was, right?
Pat Summerall, right?
Pat Summerall was
Yeah.
her dad. So now she was a campaign scheduler in the Reagan administration. And then she moved to Florida because she wasn't a big fan of DC. And then she was, working in Florida politics over the years. And then she worked for Ron DeSantis. And there was kind of a messy breakup there. No one really knows why, but she had something to do with each of Trump's campaigns. He brought her on, I think, in 21. And someone yesterday, I was listening to a podcast yesterday. I'm trying to remember. It might have been. It was a Three Martini Lunch podcast. If you've never listened to them, Jim Garrity, it's a great podcast. Said that Susie Wilds put her reputation and potential for jail time on the line to get Trump across the finish line. Now, she's never been accused of any wrongdoings, but they were being exaggerating, because if Trump hadn't won, I mean, you've seen what's happened in 5 days. Jack Smith's case fell apart. You got the cases in New York. He's supposed to be sentenced on November 26th. What happens now? So it appears that a lot of that's fallen apart. Susie Wilds, I saw a quote, and she said, "If I'm the chief of staff, the clown car does not come into the Oval Office." Trump had 4 chiefs of staff in his first term. And I was a huge John Kelly fan. I don't know what happened with the comments he made before the election. But if Susie Wilds has Trump's ear and Trump listens to her, he could do a lot of really great stuff, Neil. And the fact that he has been so quiet and tempered the last 5 days, which is so unlike him. It is not like him at all. As a matter of fact,
he
came out,
at all.
hadn't gloated at all. He even offered to pay the Democrats $20 million debt on the $1 billion Harris Waltz dumpster fire.
I saw
and
that.
I'm like, that is the ultimate troll.
Yeah.
And he's only got 1 term. So he doesn't have to make anybody happy. He can do the right things for America. He's already been on the phone with Zelensky and Putin. And I think Iran's going to be put back in a bottle and marginalized. Qatar, I think the day after the election, Qatar told the Hamas leaders, "You got to leave. You're out of here. You can't stay here anymore." So the first 100 days are going to tell us a lot.
All right. So, you understand in politics, in campaigns, that there are going to be a lot of platitudes, there are going to be a lot of promises, and then there's a reality that sets in. Mm-hmm. Trump talked about, some of the basic stuff that I think he can probably do. No taxes on overtime, no taxes on tips for your working class people. He also he went down the road a little bit about abolishing the IRS, abolishing the Department of Education, about really this time, the last time he said, "Hey, I'm going to clean the swamp." And by the time he got to the swamp had already kind of wrapped the swamp had been fortified. I think Trump knows what to expect a little bit this time.
Yeah.
It's my opinion that in 2016, Ike, he didn't think he was going to win. He wasn't really prepared to win. This time, I think he knew he was going to win, or believed he was going to win, I should say, and was far more prepared to win.
I think that's right. And, and I'm not a know-it-all. It just happens that I've been in some conversations that, I've just been in some great conversations. I told you the comment about Hillary Clinton losing on election night 2016. I also knew another agent that was in Trump Tower with then President-elect Trump when they went to notify him. And I was told that then candidate Trump said, "Oh, shit." Now, is that true? I don't know, but it would be really funny if that was accurate. And I do think the swamp got its tentacles in him because he came from the outside, didn't know what to expect, and he was told by some of these people that were Republicans, this is how Washington works. I don't think he's going to surround himself with those people this time. And we will find out in pretty short order when it is determined who the Senate Majority Leader is going to be. In my opinion, if it's not Rick Scott, he's going to have a hard time getting a lot of his stuff across the finish line because John Cornyn has said some unfavorable things towards Trump in the past. And John Thune, I don't think, is as warm on Trump, although he's played it down the middle quite a bit. But if you look on Twitter and other social media channels, there's a lot of people really pushing for Rick Scott to be the Senate Majority Leader.
And
I do think.
And if it is Scott, how does that make it different? Because he's more supportive of Trump. He'll be more eager to push things through.
I think he's going to be more eager to push things through, and not that Trump is coming in as a dictator, which he should not under any circumstances attempt to do. But I think he's got a long political rope right now. The first 6 to 9 months, he could get so much done. On day one, he's going to reverse all the executive orders that Biden reversed that were his, that had the border secure. That's going to happen on the afternoon of January 20th. So I think Rick Scott probably gives him the best chance of success. And, something we haven't even talked about yet is potential Supreme Court justices.
Okay.
And I found it quite funny, but some Democrats were proposing that they urge Justice Sotomayor, who is not in great health, 70 years old, to step down. Well, that's fine. She can step down. But if she steps down, that's a vacant seat. And if the Democrats can't get her confirmed by January 20th, which they wouldn't, it would be a vacancy for Trump to fill. So now, do I think Trump will get another Supreme Court justice in this last term? I think Alito or Clarence Thomas are likely to retire, and he will get to put another Supreme Court justice on the bench, which would be 4 over his 2 terms, which is it's unheard of for a president to get that many. And he can reshape the judiciary for even longer.
Do you have any idea of who some people would be to look for those spots?
This hasn't really been talked about a lot, but Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz is a constitutionalist. He eats, sleeps, and breathes the Constitution. And I'm not a Ted Cruz hater. I know his staff. They love him. I think Ted Cruz would be a great replacement for Clarence Thomas. And in deep red Texas, Greg Abbott could appoint his replacement until a special election. And what we saw on election night, Texas is not ready to turn blue statewide yet.
Not even close.
No. Well, I think Ted Cruz would be a great choice. Maybe even Mike Lee from Utah, who is on the short list to be Attorney General.
So I was going to ask you about cabinet posts. What are you hearing in Washington as to what kind of people he's going to put at Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, Treasury, that type of thing?
So a couple of names that I've heard bandied about through text messaging and such. I think the leader in the clubhouse right now, to use a golf term, for SecDef would be Mike Waltz, the representative out of Florida. I thought it was going to be between him and Pompeo, but I think it's Mike Waltz. Mike Waltz was a Green Beret, just retired from the military reserve duty. I've had dinner with him before. Great American, common sense. The Pentagon's been rife with a lot of, whatever your opinion is on DEI and transgender surgeries being paid for, whatever your opinion is of that. The Pentagon's been bogged down by a lot of that the last 4 years. And the Pentagon exists for one reason, to defend us from our arch nemesis. It's not supposed to be a social construct project. And I think if you put somebody like a Mike Waltz in there, I think that's what would happen. Secretary of State, a couple of names I've heard. And it just miraculous that Marco Rubio has suddenly become a big Trump supporter when he hated him in 2016, right? Yeah. From another red state, that DeSantis could do a temporary replacement until a special election. Trump won Florida by 10 plus points. So a Democrat's not going to win statewide on a Senate race anytime soon. As a matter of fact, Rick Scott, who was polling about 1.5 points ahead of his challenger, won by 9 points Tuesday night. Marco Rubio sits on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. I think he might be a pretty viable choice for Sec of State. You also have Richard Grinnell, who is a huge Trump supporter. He was Trump's ambassador to Germany. I've heard his name as either National Security Advisor or Secretary of State. So if Senator Rubio becomes Secretary of State, I could see Grinnell becoming National Security Advisor. Treasury Secretary, maybe a little more dicey and uncertain. A name I keep hearing from my home state of Tennessee, Bob Haggerty, because he was the ambassador to Japan during the Trump administration for a short time. And I've also heard his name for some other stuff as well, potentially Secretary of State. But I think if President Trump called up Haggerty and said, "You're going to be my Treasury Secretary," I think Haggerty would take it. And again, you see the trend that I'm talking about here. Each of the senators that I mentioned are from states with Republican governors. President Trump is not going to pick a senator for a cabinet position if he goes the Senate route that is a Republican from a state currently governed by a Democrat.
Yeah.
Because he loses that in the Senate. So when you're looking at the landscape, if he's going to go for someone like a Ted Cruz, Marco Rubio, Bob Haggerty, he can do it. But he's not going to go, or a Mike Lee from Utah. He's not going to go for a Republican senator from a Democrat state. And that's just how it is. He's just not going to. I think Janet Yellen probably has sat on her last Treasury meeting. Jerome Powell, who is on a 10-year term as the Federal Reserve Chairman, a friend of mine asked me about this last night. What do you think about Jerome Powell? I said, well, he was the Federal Reserve during Trump and during Biden. He's on a 10-year term. He can't be fired. And my friend said, well, it's Trump. I think Trump's got some bigger things to do than to worry about the Federal Reserve Chairman right now. Interest rates are coming down. Inflation's coming down. I think he leaves Jerome Powell in place. I think FBI Director Chris Wray will clean out his office before December 31st. He's not going to stay around to be fired.
No, because he would get fired. He would be fired somewhere between noon and 1 o'clock on the 12th.
No doubt.
Dude, there'd be no point in coming back after lunch.
No, there wouldn't.
You're not.
And then a couple of names I've got a name I've heard for FBI Director and a dark horse who would, and again, whatever your politics are, would absolutely inflame liberals' heads. So a name that I've heard for FBI Director is Matt Whitaker, who took Jeff Sessions' place on a temporary basis when Trump fired Jeff Sessions. And I'm just going to throw this up in the air and see what happens. Dan Bongino.
Oh, wow.
Dan Bongino was in the Secret Service.
That would explode some heads.
It'd be must-see TV.
In all seriousness, that would be a really good time to be a cardiologist in the Beltway. You're making a ton anyway, but who doesn't want more? You're the waiting list. Oh, wow. You'd have to tell Bongino, your staff immediately, hey, listen, everybody, we're working through the holidays.
And Bongino was a New York City police officer. He was in the Secret Service. I listen to his podcast. He's on from noon to 3 here in D.C., and I listen to him quite frequently, and he's a matter-of-fact guy. Now, does someone like that come to D.C. and they become the head of an organization like that, and then it's just too big for them and they can't wrap their head around it? Because he's got, however many millions of listeners a week, but it's different than running an entire organization at the head of government, right? But I think he'd give it the good college try. So I'm just, hey, if you want to change Washington for the better for decades to come, you have to make some of these unorthodox picks. You have to.
Not to interrupt. I'm sorry.
No, you're not interrupting.
Isn't that what? See, to me, if I'm Donald Trump, and I realize that I'm not, but I almost would think that's the message, one of the messages that's being sent. And as I say that, I kind of wonder if Trump already gets it, because on his acceptance speech, I guess early Wednesday morning from Florida, he said, "Hey, this is a victory. People voted not just for me, but they voted for this team I've put together." and he was referencing Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard and Elon Musk and others. A very, as your word's a great word for it, a very unorthodox, non-Washingtonian team that, and I think that's part of the message from the American populace is, and we're kind of sick of all this crap. Just get some things done. Get it back to where it was. And, you know, I was in the press box yesterday, and Ole Miss's press box is enclosed, and you can hear, but you can't really hear. And I had a buddy of mine who was at the stadium. We've known each other for years, and he said, man, the national anthem was different. And I was like, what do you mean? I couldn't really hear it. And he said, everybody was singing. And it got louder and louder and louder. And I was like, that's really cool. And he was like, man, I had chills. It was so cool. He was like, you know, it was Georgia and Ole Miss and all that. And in a little while, you know, you're going to be cheering against each other and all that stuff. But for those 2 minutes or so, it was, hey, we're America. And I can't remember when it was. And I guess the planes went over and they did the USA chant. But it was different. I mean, it was different, Ike. And I mean, I think there's something powerful there that people are saying, we're really ready to get back to what
I agree,
to something more wholesome, if you will, for lack of a better word, something that's more practical, that's more American. And they're like, do it. Don't do the Washington thing anymore. I think there's a certain pressure on Trump this time. That's like, all right, man, you know, you campaigned for 4 years. People supported you. We got criticized to support you. We got criticized to vote for you. We were ridiculed to vote for you, but we did it anyway, damn it. Now go do it.
Yep. I completely agree. I think, he lost 2020, but potentially that was a good thing. Potentially 2020 was a good thing because I do think Trump has changed. He still has the bombastic personality and he's going to say things that are not popular and that sort of thing. But his tone since he won on Tuesday night has been a welcome change. And he's got 4 years. He's got Susie Wilds driving the car. And I'm with you. I think, is he going to be a little more, he has to be a little more centrist and appeal to Democrats. But there are a lot of Democrats that voted for him because they are tired of the lunacy. They are tired of boys and girls bathrooms. They are tired of being called misogynist and racist and xenophobic. Charlemagne the God on Wednesday, big following on his radio program.
Huge.
He said, you know, the Harris campaign was calling him Nazi and a Hitler. Funny, they're not saying that now. And he and President Biden are going to have a sit down in the Oval Office Tuesday or Wednesday. And somebody on Twitter put, Biden invites Hitler to the Oval Office. But I do think there is a certain amount of pressure on him that he has to do what he's been hired to do. And the lack of the pressure of running for another term because he can't gives him a unique opportunity to really do some really good things. Now, the pushback in D.C. from the Democrats is going to be fierce. We know that. And you already have the Democrats campaigning for the 2026 midterms. Historically, the incumbent party in the White House loses seats in that midterm election. One of the few anomalies was during the 2006 midterms because we still had the war going on in Iraq and Afghanistan. And maybe it was 2004. Maybe in 2000, when Bush was president. One of those midterm years.
2002.
Maybe it was 2002.
Yeah.
Because we were just fresh off of 9/11 and, you know, he still had a high approval rating. So I think that was one of the anomalies in that. So while Trump can, you know, try to get a lot of the MAGA policy, if that's what you want to call it, passed and implemented, got to be careful. You got to reach across the aisle, just like him saying, hey, I'll pay the Democrats $20 million debt that they have. I mean, it's, you know, it's an ultimate troll, but at the same time, it's Trump's way of reaching out and saying, hey, I will work with you if you just be sane about it. You know, everybody loves America. And real quick, back to your comment about the national anthem sounds different and that sort of thing. It was either last Sunday or the Sunday before that. Trump was at the Steeler game, and all those fans turned around and started chanting USA, USA, USA. The entire stadium in Pittsburgh was doing that. So people feel different now. Now, you're always going to have the people that didn't vote for him. They still think he's Nazi, still think he's Hitler and all of that. But I think in general, if people are being honest, they feel better today than they did on Monday night.
Yeah, I find a lot of the Hitler Nazi stuff to be, number one, offensive, and number two, completely disingenuous. For an example, Saturday Night Live did a skit last night. And look, it's a comedy skit. It's supposed to be funny. You're supposed to make fun of everybody. Mm-hmm. Cool, it's part of it. But if they really believed the Heil Trump stuff, if they really believed that was real, they wouldn't say it. They'd be scared.
Yeah.
They don't genuinely believe it. It's kind of like, and it's why one of the reasons that I wrote about this today in my 10 Weekend Thoughts piece. It's one of the reasons that I find the whole biological males and women's sports thing to be so ridiculous is because it's such a common sense thing, and we all know what we're looking at. I use the example of my son's 18. He's a senior. He's been playing soccer competitively since he was like 6 years old. Mm-hmm. And, so every game that he plays, the girls play before him. And so we'll go and we'll see, usually the last part of the girls' game. And then we'll watch the boys' game right after that. And it's two different games. It's the same sport, but it's two different games. I'm not saying one's better or one's worse. They're just different. The girls' game is a little more artistic. It's a little more strategic. It's a little more finesse. And then the boys' game is more speed and power and physical. And frankly, sometimes I find the girls' game to be a little bit more visually appealing because of the spacing and things like that. And the boys' game sometimes is, hey, we've got some dudes who can really run. Watch this. And it's physical and guys get bumped around and it's harder to officiate. But it's absolutely different. It's not the same sport. And if you put those same kids on the field, right? And I'm all for the girls getting scholarships and stuff to go play. And there's a bunch of them from the program that my son is in at Oxford who've moved on. In fact, one of my neighbors, their daughter's playing competitive soccer at South Alabama now on a full scholarship, and I think that's awesome. But if you put the boys on the same field with the girls are going to get hurt. And I don't know why.
Absolutely.
I don't know why that's not a misogynistic thing to say. It's not sexist. It's not bigoted. It's rational. It's common sense. And I'm not saying that the boys' game is better or worse or any of that. It's just completely different, and we see that. And when you put boys on a volleyball court with girls, and there's a reason they put the net for boys higher than they do for girls. There's a reason. It's not sexist. It's to protect the people that are playing, to protect the participants. Yeah. And suddenly you have girls suffering these severe facial injuries and things. It's ridiculous. And I just think I think America wants to push back on all that stuff and go, this is dumb. Let's get rid of the dumb stuff. Mm-hmm. We have more important things to worry about.
Yeah. And Neil, I'll give you a different perspective. I'm a girl dad. If my girl was playing on a high school or college team and there were men playing against her, she wouldn't be out there for the very reasons you just said. Men are stronger genetically. They just are. And I find it a bit, well, maybe not even a bit hypocritic. I'm trying to play the middle of the road here, but the hypocrisy is real when you have the Democrat Party that during 2020, we're talking about believe all women, the Me Too movement, abortion rights, unless your daughter is playing volleyball against a boy that is identifying as a girl. But then all bets are off. So just some common sense, and I don't know why they call it common because it's so uncommon. But I think some of that drove some of the vote. People just want to get back to just a little bit of normalcy. Now, another close friend of mine said last night, Trump has an opportunity to do some really good things with his cabinet selections and policy. And my friend said, if I don't hear anything about the president for 4 years, that will be a successful presidency. Calvin Coolidge, back in the day, infamously hated the limelight. He thought the government had a very minimal role in everybody's daily lives. It was the defense of the American homeland and a few other things. If Trump could adopt some of that, he could go out with insane popularity numbers when he leaves in 4 years, which could help springboard the 28 nominee for the GOP to win another term.
All right, last couple of things. You mentioned 28. It's way too early to really talk about 28, but I love politics, and so you already think about it. I would suspect, obviously, the end of Joe Biden is near. He will sail off into the sunset. By the way, does Trump pardon Hunter Biden as a sign of, hey, let's just move on?
I don't know, Neil. He has given some. He's given some tips that he might do it, but at the same time, he was railing against Hunter to garner votes. So I don't know if he will. I really, there's still 70 days left in the Biden presidency. I'm not convinced Joe Biden won't do it.
Yeah.
He may still do it. The Democrat Party is already in shambles. The Biden camp is pointing fingers at the Harris camp, who's pointing fingers at the Biden camp, who's mad at Nancy for pushing him out, who's mad at Kamala for not speaking up because of Biden's cognitive decline. So what does Biden have to lose by pardoning his son?
And a lot of people would go, well,
has nothing to lose.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people would go, well, if I'm honest with myself, I would pardon my son too.
Right. And
so
Joe Biden's 82 years old.
Yeah, I wouldn't hold it against Joe Biden if that was one of his last.
Me either.
I would go, okay.
No, me either. His legacy is intact, whether good or bad. Pardoning Hunter is not going to do anything to change his legacy.
And his legacy in his party is this: I ran in 2020 by saying I was going to be the guy that
the bridge candidate.
The bridge candidate. It turns out I wasn't. I told you I would keep Donald Trump out of the White House, and I didn't. So in the eyes of Democrats, I failed. I mean, what do I? So I might as well take care of my own. I do think this is the last we'll hear of Kamala Harris, right? She's bye-bye.
Yeah, she'll get a very lucrative professorship at some university, and she'll continue to talk about racism and misogyny, and she will never be broke, but her days on the national political scene are over.
So who are some Democratic names to be watching when we watch the talking head shows and things of that nature over the next, I don't know, couple of years before the horse race gets warmed up for good?
Yep. I'll give you some names. Wes Moore, the current governor of Maryland. I've been told by some members on the Hill that are on the Republican side that Wes Moore will be the president one day.
Okay.
Wes Moore is one. He was a combat veteran. Gretchen Whitmer, governor of Michigan, highly regarded. I've even been told this week that she is now the de facto leader of the Democrat Party. Josh Shapiro from Pennsylvania, who, if Harris had picked him, I think she would have won Pennsylvania. I think he would have gotten her across the finish line in Pennsylvania, but not Michigan nor Wisconsin. And, as we discussed on the podcast last week, watch out for Jill Stein's vote total in Dearborn, Michigan.
Yeah.
And she pulled almost 50,000 votes in Michigan, maybe 60,000 votes in Michigan, maybe a little more. And that wasn't the difference in Kamala losing Michigan. But it just highlights the fact that Arab Americans don't trust Kamala. Early on in the night, on Tuesday night, they were doing exit polling on CNN. And John King, who does a great job on election night for CNN. I hate to say that.
Oh, he does.
He does. He does a great job. Great job. Some of the exit polling came out, and the black male vote in Georgia for Trump was 25%. And someone on there commented, if it's 25% nationally, the election's over. And come to find out, Trump doubled his black male vote in places like Philadelphia and Detroit and Chicago. Sorry, I digressed a little bit. So another name you're going to hear a lot about, because he's slick and a good-looking tall guy, is Gavin Newsom. Can he win nationally? I don't know. I don't think so.
I think the thing hurts him. I mean, looking back on it, he and maybe even Gretchen Whitmer, because I do sort of wonder if the Democrats will even think about running a female this time, because they're 0 for their last 2 doing that. And then the California thing, unless things dramatically change, the California thing works against Gavin Newsom.
I don't disagree. And if you look at the raw vote totals, Trump got almost 40% of the vote in California this time. And if you look at a map, just a map, California is predominantly red. All of the farmlands and the suburbs in that area, but it's the big city population centers like Los Angeles and San Francisco that win the day for Democrats. The only Republican to win statewide in the last 30 years in California is Arnold Schwarzenegger. And that's because he's basically a Democrat. So Gavin Newsom, but if you go back and do a little research on Newsom the last 6 months, he's come way to the center of the last 6 months. He really has. He came out in favor of Prop 36, which increased penalties for shoplifting and retail theft, which he had just let it go unfettered and unchecked. Also in California, and he's not going to run for president, but just as a microcosm of Newsom's viability as a candidate. Gascon, who was the DA in California, who everybody said was just opening the prisons and not prosecuting anybody. He got beat by about 600,000 votes.
Yeah.
So law and order is a popular thing in California again.
Go figure.
Yeah, no kidding, right? Common sense. Back to that common sense thing you said. So another name I keep hearing for 28, and granted it's still early, is Pete Buttigieg. He is never going to be president. I will call it right here. You can record this and you can pull it back up in 4 years. And if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But he is never going to be president. If the Democrats double down with a candidate like Buttigieg, they will lose again. Can you imagine Buttigieg and J.D. Vance debating?
No.
Oh, my. It wouldn't even be a fair fight.
No, and if I'm the Democrats, I'm looking at J.D. Vance at this point, doing some football terms, doing some advanced scouting, knowing that this game is still months away, if you will.
Yeah.
And I'm going, hey, we better start putting a scouting report together on this. We better start working on that, or we're going to get embarrassed because, I saw it was an exit poll. You may have sent this to me. My wife may have sent this to me. I don't remember. I've been getting a lot of things from people. J.D. Vance, I think it was my wife Laura sent it to me. J.D. Vance was the one of the four major candidates on the 2 tickets that left with he had a positive approval rating in exit polls. The guy, people like J.D. Vance. The Democrats, their strategy on he's weird, backfired incredibly. He isn't weird. He's a perfectly normal guy. People look at him and women look at him and go, oh, he's a good-looking guy. He loves his wife. He loves his kids. Seems pretty successful. They like his beard. Men look at him and go, I wouldn't mind having a beer with that guy.
No doubt.
And so that's very popular, right? You're covering a lot of ground when both men and women like you. You're on the path at that point. And look, he's going to be Trump's VP, and I'm curious to see because normally VPs just disappear. They put them into the paneling and they go away. If I'm Trump, I don't know that I do that with J.D. Vance if I'm truly interested in the future of the party.
Nope. This is the next 4 years is J.D. Vance's audition to be the nominee in 28. Now, if he ultimately is not the nominee in 28, the bench is deep for the Republicans. I think Ron DeSantis could feasibly run again in 28. And he's got some lessons that he learned from this time trying to run. I think he could run. I think there's some Republican governors throughout the 50 states that could potentially run. But I think the next 4 years are vital for J.D. Vance as far as being a president in the next 3 cycles, right? If he's going to be the president within the next 12 years, this is his audition. And I agree with you. His rollout, initially I wasn't a big fan, as I mentioned at the top of the show. But man, I got myself a man crush on J.D. Vance right now. I do. I think
lots of us do. I mean, He has a great story. I mean, I was fortunate. I grew up with probably upper middle class home, nuclear family, both parents, 2 brothers, the whole deal. My dad was a college professor and my mom was a high school teacher. And there was never any broken family stuff with us. But you read his story and you're like, wow. I mean, it's really impressive. And then the way he's able to communicate. And I thought his stint on Rogan that day was big.
Yeah.
He did one with Theo Vaughn that that people liked.
Yeah.
So last thing, I'm curious. You're in Washington. A lot of the network people are there. A lot of the people that are opinion makers and opinion shapers, and the Washington Post, and it's a pretty big media town, Washington D.C. It's my opinion. You can feel free to tell me I'm an idiot, and I'll probably agree with you if you do, because you're smarter than I am. But it's my opinion that the media was rebuked in this election. That the populace basically looked at the American media and said, "We don't believe you anymore. You don't have any credibility anymore. We don't trust you anymore." Is it possible, Ike, that this is a shifting sands of media, the way that politics are covered, not just an election, but politics in general, that there's going to be more emphasis on podcast and YouTube streams and things of that nature, and less emphasis on mainstream, traditional network and mainstream media?
This could be the biggest domino to fall in the entire election, notwithstanding Trump being elected and rebuting all of this, the DEI stuff and the boys and girls bathrooms, and trying to make middle America feel bad because they don't have advanced college degrees and don't have doctor in front of their name, is the diametric shift in how people get their information. People no longer trust the legacy media. All you got to do is turn on BSNBC if you must. If you have to do it for your job, I understand, but for any other reason, I don't know why you would. But no one trusts the legacy media. It's already come out that ABC they had altered some transcripts or wouldn't release. CBS, the same thing with an interview with Kamala on 60 Minutes because it was so horrendous. The legacy media as it is today will not have the influence that it's had for the last 100 years. And I'll give you the prime example of that is Jeff Bezos, who is a left-leaning guy. He's a liberal. Amazon, based out of Seattle, Washington, which is a very left-leaning state, 2 weeks ago came out and said, we are not endorsing for the presidency. And his staff, a bunch of them quit in protest. Well, not long after that, the New York Times said they weren't going to endorse. Somebody smart at the Times and the Washington Post says, this isn't working out for us. The very next day after Trump won, Bezos put on his Twitter, I look forward to working with President Trump to make America truly great. Now, he wouldn't have said that 6 months ago. But the podcasts like yours and the Clay Travises and the Buck Sextons, and you got Joe Rogan, you got Megyn Kelly, the alternative media, as you call it, is on the upswing and has a lot of room for growth. And you can tell how influential it is when you have the likes of Hillary Clinton saying that some of these outlets should be censored.
Yeah.
Well, who's going to be the arbiter of censorship? I thought this was the First Amendment. We can say what we want, even if we don't agree with someone. So I think the biggest winner of the election 2024 is, one, the American people, and two, the alternative media. So the future looks bright for you, my friend.
Yeah, I mean, that's good. I can remember when I got out of traditional media, out of mainstream media back in 2008, being ridiculed. And there was a lot of time that I thought, man, I probably made a mistake. I should try to get back into it. And it turns out I did the right thing. It's a total shift. I was talking to a class, journalism class at the University of Arkansas last Monday, and I told them, no matter what you think, no matter what your views are, the one thing you better understand as you prepare to go into this field, for God only knows what reason, you should you should pay attention to the shifting sands. Pay attention to the fact that a podcaster, a former comedian, who now has an incredibly lucrative, successful podcast.
I didn't know you were a comedian, Neil.
Not me.
Oh.
I'm not quite as jacked as Rogan either. But if I could train all day, maybe I would be. But the point is that Rogan was able to tell the sitting vice president of the United States, a woman who was one heartbeat from the presidency, a woman who was the Democratic nominee 1 week removed away from a national election. He was able to say, hey, look, you either come to me and do this on my terms, or we don't do it. Because you need me and I really don't need you. And he was telling the truth. That was inconceivable 10 years ago, Ike.
Oh, not conceivable at all. And the very fact that Donald Trump had time to go to Austin, Texas, a state that he won by 5 to 7 or 8 points, whatever it was, he could go and spend 3 hours with Rogan, and it was a dynamic 3 hours from everything I hear. Not only did Trump do it, so did J.D. Vance. The fact that
Vance blew it out of the water.
That's what I've heard. I've not listened to it yet. But the fact that Kamala Harris's team said, well, she has scheduling conflicts and she's too busy. But she could divert her plane from North Carolina to go be on Saturday Night Live for 1 minute and 20 seconds of airtime instead of going to Detroit for a rally on Saturday before the election. Tells you all you need to know. It hurt her. She could not do 3 hours with Rogan. She just could not do 3 hours with Rogan. And she may have some great ideas. Some of her policies, if enacted, might have been really good. But the fact that she said, I would not have done anything differently in my time, I would not do anything differently that comes to mind than what Joe Biden did. And the fact she would not do a lot of this alternative media unless it was something called Call Me Daddy or some garbage like that, tells you all you need to know about the influence of the alternative media. And the Democrats should be worried.
You know what really, and I'm keeping you too long, but I promise we're almost done. This is what's fascinating to me. I always put things in sports terms because I just live in that world, and I'm probably one tracking, and it is football season, and I did just cover a game, so I have some excuses. If you're losing, like an L's an L, right? If my team, if I'm coaching a team and we lose 42-7, it counts as the same as if we lose 17-10. It's an L. Mm-hmm. I mean, one L might feel a little better than the other, but it's an L. Mm-hmm. And in this case, you're playing for the big trophy. So you're either going to leave with the trophy or you're not. And if you're not, if you're losing, at that point, don't you throw caution to the wind? The whole, hey, look, she can't do 3 hours. I understand. You're right, by the way. I understand that's right. But I would have been in the room going, wait a minute. Does anyone in here, and I think the answer to this question would have been no, does anyone in this room listen to Rogan? He doesn't grill his guest. Mm-hmm. Even when he disagrees with them, he's respectful. Even when he disagrees with them, he just has a conversation. Even when he thinks that the person is utterly full of shit, he's pretty nice to the person. Why are we bailing on this? They did Call My Daddy or Call Me Daddy or whatever it was, Call Her Daddy or Daddy, whatever the show was.
Whatever it is.
It got 1 million listens.
Mm-hmm.
Trump on Rogan got, I think on Spotify, it was 35 million listens. On YouTube, it was some insane number. It was before they put it on Musk and Rogan himself put it on X as a stream. So we're probably talking conservatively 55 million views and or listens. And I might be being so conservative that I'm cutting that almost in half. Yep. But we'll just go 55 million. I don't know how you could sit in her room in her strategy sessions and go, I would have said, Madam Vice President, I think you have no choice but to do this. You have to go sit in there, and because if we're convinced we're losing anyway, which makes me think maybe they thought they were winning. Maybe they were so out of touch with the reality that they had no idea what was coming. But it seems to me that they would have looked at their internals because the senator in Wisconsin,
Tammy Baldwin
told them you're losing. You're losing Wisconsin.
Yep. Whitmer told them they were losing Michigan 3 months ago.
So they knew it. So if you're going to lose, what was the strategy? Okay, well, we're losing by 2 touchdowns. I don't want to lose by 4. It's the same thing, babe. You're not leaving with the trophy if you don't win the game. You got to play to win the game. You're running the ball. It's not working. It's time to open up the offense. What's the worst thing that can happen?
Yeah, and let's double down on Nazi and Hitler and fascist because, we're losing, but we just haven't cracked through the wall yet. Eventually, when people go to the poll, they're going to do it. And you will never make me believe that they didn't know on Saturday night when they diverted her plane to go to Saturday Night Live that they didn't know she was going to lose.
Yeah. Oh, I completely agree.
They knew it. And, James Carville, who's one of the greatest political minds of the last 100 years, don't agree with him, but I appreciate his passion and his insightfulness. He said that Harris's campaign manager, Jen O'Malley Dixon, or whatever her name is, as late as 9 p.m. on Tuesday night of the election, they were still telling people in the field that she was going to win. People were in denial, Neil. They were in denial. And, alternative media, as you and I have talked about the last 10 minutes, is going to be a big player in future political elections. It's just going to be.
Yeah.
And the fact that Donald Trump has a mantra of, I'll go on CNN with Caitlin Collins. I'll go on BSNBC with Joe Scarborough. Heck yeah, I'll go to Austin, Texas for 3 hours with Joe Rogan. Kamala was not willing to go to those unfriendly territories like a Charlie Kirk or a Dan Bongino, who would have had her on their show and been kind and respectful.
Yeah.
But she just wouldn't do it.
It's fascinating. It's one of the reasons that I'm really curious to see whether that party can learn its lessons. And so far, I think the answer is no, they can't. But it's still
not right now. But it's still raw and it's still early. Give them, as we get closer, you roll into 26 after Trump's been in office, given his first State of the Union, gone through his first budget. Then you're going to start seeing the Democrats hone a new message of some kind, maybe come back a little bit to the center of the political scape. And that will tell you a lot. I think the beginning of late 25, early 26 is going to tell you the Democrat Party going forward. We're not going to see it in the first 30, 60, 90 days of a Trump presidency because there's going to be this outrage and screaming and all of that. But once things settle down a little bit, and if Trump's policies start working, some of these Democrats may say, you know what, we need to be more centrist than we have been. That's why we're getting our asses kicked.
Well, we would love to keep having you here on MPW Digital as all those things unfold. A lot of people I've gotten a tremendous amount of feedback with people going, "Hey, keep Ike coming." So we're gonna try to make that happen. You're very popular with the viewership and listenership at MPW Digital.
Well, I appreciate it, and as we mentioned, alternative media is on a rocket ship right now. I think it's about time you raise your ad rates.
It might be, yeah. there's other people that say that. So,
and I have opinions on other things too, Neil. So you can always call on me. Don't call on me just every 2 years.
Yeah, no, we'll definitely get you on. I won't even ask you about Vanderbilt today. They struggled a little bit against Cox, but.
Yeah, well, they laid an egg, and I said they needed to bank that 7th win because now you've got an LSU that's pissed off after losing to Alabama. Vanderbilt's got to go to LSU next week. I don't see them winning that game, even though LSU didn't play that well.
You know what's
be ready.
You know what's funny, and I'm going to say this. This is one to watch. In this era of college football with the 12-team playoff, when you get eliminated and LSU's out now, you're on quit watch. You got guys that are there for their NIL. They start looking ahead up to a program like LSU that opened the season. Hey, we're playoffs or bust.
Yeah.
When bust becomes reality, I don't know that I think they let go of the rope a little bit, as opposed to Vanderbilt didn't open the season going, hey, we're going to the playoffs. So they're trying to still stack wins. I think Vanderbilt will play harder in LSU.
Definitely.
Than LSU will. And so you just never really know. I mean, LSU has some issues, and those issues will fester all week long.
And I think Brian Kelly was a bad hire for the LSU Tigers.
He was a bad cultural fit, turns out.
Yep.
I'm a Louisiana boy, and I probably should have seen it. I was like, he's a good coach at Notre Dame. But,
And we're finding out real quick with Billy Napier at Florida. It's just not working out. Now, his team's playing better over the last month than they have the previous 2 seasons. If he gets a top 10 or 20 recruiting class, maybe he can turn it around. But his buyout is so large that they can't afford to get rid of him right now.
Yeah, that's why he got the vote of confidence last week, and then the basketball coach is in trouble, and so there's no telling what's going to happen there. All right, well, we'll catch up on some sports one day with you too. We'll get your thoughts on some things as things roll around. Hey, listen, I kept you a long time. Thank you so much for your time. I hope you have a great week coming up, and it'll be interesting. It'll be an interesting time to be living in DC.
Absolutely. Call on me anytime, Neil. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Ike.
See ya.